want to run you through how I approached searching for a van, picking the right van, and what I learned in doing that. Choosing the right van was really hard for me because I like to find the perfect solution to my problems, and there is no perfect solution, there's only trade-offs. Inevitably, my researching just became a way of procrastinating doing the hard thing, which was making the purchase of the van. It was my way of fooling myself into thinking that I was making progress. Now, don't get me wrong, research isn't a bad thing, in fact I encourage it, but there is a point where you've gathered most of the important information, and any further research isn't providing you a lot of reward for the effort that you're putting in. After say a month or two of researching, you should probably just commit to purchasing a van. For me personally, one of the major factors that had me delaying the purchase of the van was because I would be spending pretty much all of my money that I had on it, and it was also going to be the place that I was living in full time. So it was a big and risky move for me, especially if I bought the wrong van. I learned so much more in a month of owning my van than I could have in 3 months of researching it. So it's yeah, do your research, do the best that you can in order to mitigate the risks that you can, but at the end of the day, you have to commit at some point. Realistically, you're probably going to make mistakes regardless of what you do. My first van that I got, when I was doing the inspection, I forgot to check the roof, and I even got a mechanic to do a pre-purchase inspection, and he also forgot to check the roof. I used to have a little checklist, and on the checklist there was a checkbox that said, check the roof. And for whatever reason, I think by this point I'd checked so many vans, I thought, I don't need this, I know the drill. So on this van, I didn't check the roof. And then I was cleaning the van, I was doing a big clean over after I'd purchased it about a month later, and I checked the roof, and there's a big dent in it, which is all rusted out. There really is no better teacher than regret and making these mistakes yourself, and you can only do that when you actually commit to something and start on it. There's heaps of van options out there, but before you begin to look at them, I think it's good to take a step back and be like, what do I really want out of this? Most people who want a van are just looking for a little home that they can either live in full time or that they can have as a weekender to get away, and do adventures with. And so a van is just one of the ways in order to achieve that goal, but there are other options that I think people often overlook. So you could get an RV or a motorhome. You could also get a trailer, anywhere from a massive ass, pretty much house trailer to a little teardrop camper. There's also the option of the ute motorhomes, which are basically just a ute, and then some company will strip off all the back and build a motorhome on top of it. You could also buy your own flatbed ute and then build off the back of that, or get the flatbed and then plonk an existing one. So the Toyota Hilux, the Deliver 9, the Daily E6, the Transit, they all come in the cab chassis versions, and then from there you can either pull out that tray and build on the back yourself, or if you've got a flatbed tray, you can plonk an existing solution onto that. You can obviously do this with an actual truck too. Same thing if you have a flatbed as well, you can take a actual full caravan and just plonk it on the truck bed. So I hope you get the point here. It's just there may be a better solution to getting you towards your end goal, because everyone's needs are going to be completely different. You may need a four-wheel drive that can go off-road all the time because you're constantly going off-roading. You may need something that can fit a massive family. You may need something that you can use as your everyday and work vehicle during the week. So just think about your needs and what you really need, and then think if any of those other options might be a bit more suitable, because sometimes they are, but then sometimes a van's also more suitable, even just for the pure aspect of money. Buying even secondhand RVs can be quite expensive. So in which case, if a van is the way to go, then we can look at some van options. Okay, so this is obviously a few days later because I've had to put all the walls back on the van and set up my bed, which is basically just a mattress on some Bunnings tables.
Please don't tell anyone how I live.
But I've got some van options here that I'm going to show you, so I'll just show you the screen. So the question of what vans are out there actually comes up quite a bit, and these are the main ones that I've found that you can purchase in Australia. In the Mercedes-Benz line, you've pretty much got your Sprinter, your Vito, and then there is the MB series, which they're no longer selling. And in the Sprinter, you can either get a cab chassis or a panel van. In the Vito, you can get a crew cab, a panel van, or a people mover. So these are the MB100 and MB140 series, which they're no longer making, but are still obviously available. Then you've got the Vito range, which is pretty popular. As they also do a Tourer version, and there's also a V-Class, which I think is the newer Vito. They come in many different configurations. You can get a medium wheelbase, a long wheelbase option, and there's also an electric option. Then you have the classic Instathought influencer van, which is the Mercedes Sprinter. So the good thing about the Mercedes Sprinter is it's very configurable. There's lots of options. They come in long, short, high, super high, etc. New South Wales Ambulance use them in their fleet for a long time, so you'll often find ex-ambulance versions out there. So if you need something that's really, really tall, some vans don't come this tall, or if they come tall, they come really long, but the Sprinter will let you get like a tall plus a quite short wheelbase version. So they're really configurable in terms of getting the exact size you want. I find these to be really, really cute, the tall but short wheelbase ones. That's kind of really, I think, the ideal configuration because it's much easier to park. I do recall there being talk of a four-wheel drive version. I know it's out there, but I don't know if you can get it in Australia. Now we move on to Toyota, old reliable. This is the Town Ace, which they no longer make. And then there's the much more popular and prevalent High Ace. You can put it into three categories: the 100 series, 200 series, and the 300 series. I reckon the easiest way to spot these is just by the body shape. You can see the 100 series is kind of a little more bubbly, a little bit more rounded. On the 100 series, it's much more flat and square. And on the 300 series, it's very flat and square, but it's a little bit wider here, and they've got the front bonnet sort of bump now because the engine's out the front here, whereas in the 200 and the 100 series you're sitting atop of the engine, which is like underneath you. Within each series you have the option of either a long wheelbase, which is what's presented in these photos and is ironically their shortest wheelbase they have, or a super long wheelbase. And the super long wheelbase variants that have the chairs in them and the windows are called the commuter. So if there's no windows and it's all panel gaps, it's just a super long wheelbase, and if there is windows and there's chairs, it's the commuter. So unless you particularly want these windows, I would actually be leaning towards just a super long wheelbase, not the commuter version. But in terms of dimensions, they are the same. There's also a lot of imported races from Japan today, which do look slightly different, but most importantly, some of these will come with an all-wheel drive option. So I think that's the real benefit of the imported series. If you want to know if a Hiace is imported or not, just by looking at it, here are some ways you can find that out. They mostly all tend to have this little mirror here, which is used to help them parallel park. Some of them will have this little cutout step in the rear. If it's a newer year, like a 2023, but it still has that flat front like the 200 series, it's definitely imported because all the Australian ones went to that bonnet lip that we saw before. Almost all of them will also have full glass around the whole van. They don't seem to do the panel vans in Japan, and also some of them come in a mid-roof variant. So the Japanese imports do give you a lot more options. In the Volkswagen lineup, we have the Caddy Cargo, which I actually think is an awesome little micro camper, and I've seen people fit these out well enough to which they're living in it full time. The Transport is another popular one. They used to have this configurator on their website, so you could basically customize the van out exactly how you wanted it. A window here, 3 seats up the front. Like, it was the most configurable van that I could find, and this was actually the ideal van I wanted. But mechanically speaking, that's another bag of chips, and we'll get into that later. But this is definitely a really cool option in terms of the configurations that they allowed you to have straight off their website. And bonus, they also have full motion technology, which is their all-wheel drive. The other beauty of it is it also comes in quite a few configurations of height and length. Lastly, the crafter. This also comes in a heavy duty version if you need it. It also has the 4Motion option, which is really nice, and it also has a bunch of configurations here: standard, high, and super high. I don't think you can mix and match though, like the Sprinter. They also have like pre-built for adventure options like the California and the camper vans. They're even doing fully custom vehicle conversions now, these bespoke ones. So Volkswagen really give you a lot of options like nobody else when it comes to customizability and sort of making it perfect for how you want it. In the Hyundai, it's nice and simple. Like the Toyota has the highest, the Hyundai has the iLoad, and the Staria Load is just the new version of the iLoad. As far as I know, they don't actually come in any variations of size or configurations. You've got the Transit Custom, which I actually think is a really cute van. This one comes in a short wheelbase and a long wheelbase, and then you've got the normal Transit, which comes in quite a few different sizes that are quite configurable. This is actually one of the vans I was looking at originally as well, because again, I quite like the boxy square designs where you can have a short wheelbase and a high top. In the Iveco, you pretty much have the Daily or the Daily E6. There is a 4x4 Daily, but it looks like it might only come in the cab chassis version in Australia. I know in the UK you can get the van in 4x4, but I'm not sure about Australia. We're definitely getting more into kind of like a truck territory more than a van, but this is totally an option. LDV has quite a few options here. The G10 Plus, I haven't got it here, but I think the G10 might have been the older version of this. There's the V80 as well, and then there is the Deliver 9, which is probably their most popular one. And honestly, for the price, I've not heard too many bad things about this. They've also got the electric versions of these too, but we'll ignore those for now. You've got the Fiat Ducato, you've got the Renault Kangoo and the Renault Traffic. You've also got the Renault Master. Seen a few of these out there. This comes in a short, medium, long, and extra long. Citroen Berlingo, another little micro camper option. The Mitsubishi Express, the Holden Combo XC, the Suzuki APV, the Peugeot Partner L2 and the Peugeot Expert, and then the Mazda E1800 Compact E. So as you can see, there's a lot of options for vans out there, but the lingering question is, which one should I get? And the answer to that is, well, it depends on what you need and what you want. And the way I would figure that out is to draw up a simple spreadsheet, list out all the things that you definitely need and maybe also what you want, and then compare the vans to see which ones are most suitable. I did this when I first started and I got down to about 6 vans, I think it was, that may have suited my needs. Unfortunately, I don't know where I've put that spreadsheet, so I can't pass it on to you, but I have started a new spreadsheet on Notion, which I'll send you the link to. It's a lot of effort to get all of the details, so I didn't end up filling it out, but if it's something you think that would be really helpful, I can open it up for everyone to fill in, or if I get enough demand, I will end up filling it in. I just didn't want to waste my time and then have no one really use it. And you can do this any way you want. You don't have to do it on Excel, you can do it on sheets, you can do it on a piece of paper in front of you. So let me roughly recreate my one and we'll walk through it together. The other thing I'll say is, if you really don't know what you need, just make a best guess as to what you think will be important, and then at the end of the day, well, if you don't know what you need, not really going to matter what you get because it's going to be a learning experience either way. So this is just an example of the kind of sheet that you could do. What you would do is you would put all the important things up the top here, and then you would put your make and model of vans down the side here, and then you would determine if they meet whatever is important to you. So for example, the interior height might be something that you absolutely will not compromise on. You must have a van that you can stand up in. So then this column would become really important to you, and you can put some conditional formatting on it so that if it goes over a certain height, it turns green, and then all you have to look for is which van is green across all the rows. More than likely it's going to be none of them because there's always a compromise, but you can sort of see which ones best suit your needs. And as I said, with some columns, if they're just non-negotiable, then you can easily cross out all the ones that don't fit that. So for me personally, mechanically sound was kind of my non-negotiable. This was the most important to me, but I'm going to come back to this one at the end. Drivetrain's pretty self-explanatory. Do you want a 2-wheel drive, an all-wheel drive, a 4-wheel drive? If you do want a 2-wheel drive, do you care if it's a front-wheel drive or a rear-wheel drive? And if you don't care compare at all, you can still have it on the list. So if you end up comparing between similar vans, you can say, well, this one's an all-wheel drive, so that's a bonus, or it might even be a negative because it's a bit more fuel or a bit more cost to repair. So long as it's not too much effort to add an extra like that, even if you don't use it as a deciding factor initially, it might become a deciding factor later on down the track. My actual opinion on this is, well, it depends where you want to go with the van. If you're always down at the snow, an all-wheel drive would save you having to put on snow chains all the time. If you go off-road a fair bit, an all-wheel drive would help in muddy conditions. But that said, if you get a rear diff locker on a rear-wheel drive car and some all-terrain tires, then that might just do the job just as good. So don't forget that as an option, and don't forget there are options that you can have that will get you what you want. So for example, if height was an option, you can always put a pop top on. So that's why it's good to have this whole spreadsheet view, because you can realize that this is the perfect van except for the height, and we won't move on the height, but we do have a fair bit of money, so we can afford to pay $10,000 say to have a pop top installed, and now we have our solution. So there's always ways around it. It's just a matter of either money or convenience or whatever you want. And please do note there is a difference between all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive and proper like 4x4. A lot of vans are actually all-wheel drive, or the manufacturer calls them four-wheel drive, 4WD, but they're sold as kind of 4x4 proper 4x4 vans when they're not. Proper 4x4 vans are actually really rare and usually quite expensive. They're usually normal vans which have then been taken somewhere and been converted. And again, see, there's another option. Say you want a 4x4, you could get a two-wheel drive and you could pay $50,000 for a conversion. If you've got the money, you've got the money. So if you really need something to do proper off-roading, then just be wary. And these all-wheel drives, as I said, when you upgrade them, the all-wheel drives, and you put lockers in the all-wheel drives and some all-terrains and you lift them, they're actually really quite capable. And as a final bit of information on this, if you test out vans and you find that, well, they have no traction, it's often because they're a rear-wheel drive and they require weight in the back to push the rear down. When I first got my Hiace, I literally couldn't even reverse park it up a hill without the rear tires spinning out, up like a semi-steep hill. I would get stuck on every wet grass patch. So as soon as I added weight into the back, that helped a lot. If you're doing like testing and you're renting vans and stuff like that, just be mindful of that. That said, I still did get bogged a lot even with the weight in the back. I'm just gonna put myself down here because I might as well. Transmission is nice and simple. Do you want an automatic or do you want a manual? I honestly can't make a case for having a manual these days. I would almost always prefer auto, but again, if you're fine with manual, don't rule it out because they're sometimes a bit cheaper to purchase, and obviously there's still manual up there. I wanted an auto, but my first van I got was manual because I thought, well, I need a van, it's not a big deal. In hindsight, the auto probably would have helped with some of the traction issues and the bogging, because otherwise you're sort of feathering the clutch and everything. Fuel type, I don't really see a bother about this either. When you say fuel type, I think what people really mean is engine type in a way. Like, yes, you get a little more burn out of a diesel, so there's that in terms of fuel cost comes into play, but then in terms of repair costs, the diesel's a bit more. So, you know, they have their pros and cons. Ultimately, I feel like it's diesel engine versus petrol engine question. It's which engine is better. What you'll probably notice is I also mainly speak about Hiaces because I pretty early on established that what I was going to get was probably going to be a Hiace. So I ended up going down that rabbit hole and learning a lot about them in particular. And in the Hiace models, there is the question of, are you going to be like towing, because the diesel would be better for that. There's longevity questions, but honestly, the new petrol engines in the Hiaces go pretty much almost as long as the diesel ones these days. They're starting to really rack up the kilometers if they're looked after. The petrol in the Hiace is slightly less prone to issues as well, so that could be a safer option. I mean, this is another topic that could be a whole discussion in and of itself. A lot of these topics could be actually, and because I'm not talking about a specific van, it's really hard for me to make comment on all of them here. Then you've got the dimensions, got your exterior dimensions, which is the exterior height, width, and length. Width is pretty easy for me. If there's a slightly wider option, I would say get it. You're not really going to have issues with a van so wide that you can't fit in the lanes, and it means if you're short like me, you're going to be able to sleep sideways a lot more comfortably. Height, however, is a bit harder. From what I read, height is really about if you want to be able to stand up or not, and it's a trade-off between the places you can go and that you can park. Car washes, for example, have a height limit. That said, most vans have things on the roof like roof racks or a roof fan, which means you technically can't use car washes anyway unless you've got a stealth fan with absolutely nothing on top, which I did at the time. So I did like going through car washes when I had my small long wheelbase highs. There's also shopping centers and car parks, especially underground car parks. Being over height will limit you massively on those. With my first van, a long wheelbase highs, it wasn't an issue. I could get into pretty much everywhere. With my current van, which is a super long wheelbase hiace, taller one, I'm pretty limited actually. There's only about 30 spots at my local shops that I can fit into, and I've had to park down the road quite a bit and then walk to the shops when those spots were taken. So again, it's all trade-off. Some people with massive vans will keep like a little bike in the van to do that, even like a motorbike at the back of the van for city driving and stuff. So they park on the outskirts of the city and then that's their city driver. A few instances of note that I came across. One time there was a hailstorm and I was able to quickly duck undercover at the shop, and I wouldn't have been able to do that in my current van. Another example was during summer when it gets like stupid hot. Having your van parked underground at the shops in summer was really nice, even though yes, it was still hot underground there, but at least I was getting out of that heat. And especially during some of the really bad fires where there was smoke everywhere, that also helped. There is also a height limit in tunnels and on some of the roadways, but don't think you'd hit them unless you're going really big. So these are all just the considerations to make when looking at height. I see three kind of heights. You got your daily driver height, which is being able to get into the shops, which is no more than 2.09. Then there's like your mid height, which is still able to get into tunnels, under bridges, maybe some larger height car parks like the Bunnings and stuff like that. And then there's anything over that. Obviously the best solution to this height problem is a pop top. It's the best of both worlds. Smaller height when driving and fitting into places, but you can stand up in it when you're camping. And if you need to stealth camp, you can still sleep with it closed. However, they're expensive to put in. They're harder to find, and some of the older ones that aren't looked after can have leaks. So it's just that trade-off. So that's your height. And then lastly over here, we have the length. And this can make a big difference, mainly in terms of parking. I've stealth camped heaps, and I think anything bigger than my super long wheelbase would be a pain to park for me. That said, some people get Toyota Coasters and they're like, yeah, park everywhere, it's no issue. It's really sort of up to you. And the beauty of this super long wheelbase, the higher specifically, is it's a breeze to park because it has a flat front. So this massive ass van is actually easier to park than some cars that I've owned that are like half the size, because you can just spin it in with that flat front. So yeah, personally, I'd be keeping it a little bit shorter than this. That's just me personally. Just means you can go and park anywhere without any hassle. Just while I'm on that front, I'm going to add one here. And we're going to put safety, because the front of that hiace being flat, that makes it a breeze to park. It also makes it a breeze to crush your legs. So there was a collision not long ago on the Harbour Bridge between a hiace and another car, only doing like 60 kilometers an hour, I think it was. And the other car like flipped and rolled and everybody got out all right. And this hiace just had the front impacted, but I'm pretty sure he had to get like his legs amputated. So yeah, if you get one of these or a car with a flat front, probably want a bull bar on the front. That said, totally hypocritical here, I have not put one on mine yet either. That said, having that bull bar is also going to reduce some of that parking ease. Again, trade-offs. The new 300 series now have like a little bonnet with the engine out front like we saw before, so it's not as big of an issue, but then you lose a bit of that parking ease. So there's also the airbags, other safety features. You know, put whatever you want into the safety column, rate it however you want using the ANCAP ratings, whatever it is. It's just something to consider. When I was looking at imports, for instance, a lot of them didn't even have the passenger airbag. So the one I got, I specifically had to get one with a passenger airbag, and it's usually like the premium models that'll have the passenger airbag. Though now I think they've changed the laws and you can't import them without one, but again, just something to consider. Then you have the interior height and width and sort of the interior design. And this is another trade-off with that flat front, because you're sitting on top of the engine to get that flat front, which means there's more heat, there's more noise. It means it's harder to get in and out of from the front and the back. For me, the heat and the noise is probably the main botherance. You can put sound deadening, heat shields and all that, but it's never going to be as perfect as having an engine out the front. The other thing is how the van is actually shaped. I love, for instance, the shape of the Ford Transit. I love any boxy van. I just like a really easy box because it's easier to do them up. I think it looks better, and with the engine out externally the front of the van, it means you can get up from your seat and walk right through to the cabin. Just a bit easier. It's just a bit better. So in terms of interior design, the Transports, the Sprinters, the Volkswagens, like those are my sort of ideal interior design van, because especially with the Transports, you can customize every screw on it. You give you options for everything, windows where you want them. So I really did want a Transporter for this reason, because I could customize it exactly how I wanted in terms of that interior. Things like ground clearance might be important as well if you're going a little bit off-road, but not too crazy off-road and you just need that ground clearance. But again, it can be upgraded. You can put springs in it. Again, add whatever you want here. So
it adds 2 centimeters to my overall ride height, which was really important because it's low as standard. Just having that extra 2 centimeters makes a big difference out there. It doesn't turn the van into a rock hopping machine, but I found there were plenty of instances where just having that extra ground clearance was super handy, because with the road tires, the van actually sits really quite low.
There's a bunch of other things that may or may not be important to you. For instance, I really wanted barn doors on the back of my van. I don't know why, I've always preferred the barn doors. I've got a lift up on this one, and yes, it is really helpful in the rain, but it also sticks out over footpaths. So if I reverse into like a reverse car spot at the beach or something, and it's going over a footpath, and I lift up the boot, if it's at an angle or something, that boot can actually be sticking out like well into the footpath, and if someone on a bike comes by or something, it's going to knock them out. So it just became like way more obtrusive. I also really wanted 3 seats up the front. In a lot of vans you can get that, and I know you can change that later, but then you need to find the seat, pay for an engineer's certificate, etc. I just never used the middle console very much. I only need something simple, and what was on the back of the folding middle seat in my previous Hiace was perfect. So again, this is all going to be personal stuff. You customize this list however you want it. Aircon might be something that you must have, but just don't get caught up in things that you can easily add later or change later. Now let's go into mechanical reliability. This was the top of my list. This was the thing that I didn't really want to trade off for anything else. This van was going to be my full-time home. I was going to go places by myself, remote-ish places. I am not mechanically minded in any sense of the word. I didn't want things to go wrong unnecessarily. Of course, things can go wrong. They can always go wrong, but I just didn't want to add unnecessary risk or potential of them going wrong. I'm already taking a big leap moving into my van. I didn't need major mechanical stress on top of that. So I did really want a Transporter. Or even a Sprinter or something, because I liked the interior design and the shape so much. When I was looking at the Hiace at that point, they didn't even have the option for barn doors, right? Now they do with the new ones, so they're just very behind on all this stuff. They didn't have any option for 3 seat. It's just like, here's the van you want, choose auto or manual, okay, buy. That's sort of Toyota's approach to it. So I went to several mechanics with a little list of vans that I was considering, right? That I'd honed down from this big list, right? Because when you take this big list, you'll sort of be able to probably pick a few where you're like, okay, these are my real options from this big list. And that's what I talk about here in step 2, right? Gather more information from the options narrowed down from step 1B, which is comparing all the vans to see which is closest to your requirements. And then you can create sort of pros and cons from them. So I was sort of up to step 2 at this point. I'd gathered all my possible options, ones that I think would suit me, ones that I definitely ruled out. Basically, all you're doing in this sheet is like ruling out stuff that you know that you are not gonna want to have. So I took this sheet with a few van options on them to a couple of mechanics, and I said, which would you not buy, or which would you definitely buy, and so on. Most of them barely had to glance at the sheet before they said petrol Hiace, petrol Hiace. I sent an email to a mechanic that I found on YouTube, similar thing, list, response, petrol Hiace. Time and time again, they all said, screw the Transporters. I watched a lot of YouTubes, I read a lot of reviews, same sort of thing. Screw the Transporters, get a Hiace. So if I wanted mechanical reliability, it was going to be a Hiace. And this is a bit of a hard topic to cover too, because often issues that arise are issues pertaining to like specific models or specific like certain engines or so on. You'll hear people online say, don't ever get X van, or I had X and it was really bad, or definitely get X, I had X and it was really great. And this is a problem because it lacks specificity, because as I said, maybe they just got a really bad model, maybe there was a production batch that was bad, maybe it's a very well-known issue, and if you can just fix that one issue, it's not a big deal. Or maybe they just got the one good model and they meticulously looked after it and the rest of them are crap. So that's the thing when you're looking for vans, you really do want good service history. And I say that as someone who bought a Hiace with no service history. So yeah, I mean, that was the beauty of the Hiace though. They can be pretty badly treated and still last. So again, it was taking away some of that risk in my mind. But they really go well when they're really well treated. Whereas some other vans, you have to be really super careful. Now, the Sprinter did seem like an okay option in terms of reliability, but I talked to some mechanics and they said, yeah, they're okay, but European parts basically means that they're not designed for the Australian climate, and the parts may wear quicker, they may cost a lot more if you don't source them yourself, and so on and so on. And so there did seem to be a few more, the European designs tend to be a bit more complex, so there tends to be a bit more room for errors to pop up, especially if you're not keeping on top of them. The LDVs I've heard some pretty good things about, I must say, again, for the price that is, but they were still pretty new on the market when I was looking at it, so it's hard to know very long term their longevity. But again, that said, for the price, like, you could almost buy 2 LDV vans for the price of a Hiace. So, it's like, even if something major does really go wrong, you just buy a new one, So at the end of the day, basically, no matter what, for me, the Hiace just kept coming out on top. And I kept pushing this because I didn't want to get a Hiace. Again, because they weren't interiorly designed how I liked them, the look of them, blah, 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 blah. I didn't want to get a Hiace. But because this was kind of my no compromises option, it was my sticking point. I wasn't willing to compromise on this, so that was why I chose it. So I got a petrol Hiace. My second van that I'm in now is also a petrol Hiace, though it is imported from Japan and it is an all-wheel drive, which is perhaps another video in itself. So spend a little bit of time figuring out what's important to you, what you won't budge on, what you can budge on. Add it to the list, use it as a guide. You can do this on paper, Excel, whatever you want. I like Notion these days. Don't spend too long here though. It's just to give you this idea of what you want and narrow down the choices a bit. Then you've got to really start committing to something. I just want to touch on the research aspect of it. I know I mentioned this a bit before, but just try to get really specific in your research and try to figure out what's objective and what's subjective. I hear people saying higher seats are really uncomfortable for long drives, but I regularly did long drives in mine and it was fine. But I'm also not a big bloke, so this is something that would be really subjective depending on the person. Don't forget also, say the Japanese imports, they have different levels of premium, so their premium seats are way more comfortable in the premium models than the lower models. So if someone says, oh, the imports have really uncomfortable seats, well, maybe because you got the less premium models, so that these become like quite subjective topics, and I would just take any opinions that could be subjective very lightly and try to seek more information from them. Ask them for more specifics because it's the specificity that is key. Like people saying, don't get this, I had an issue with it. You should follow up with, oh, well, what year model is it? What fuel type or engine is it? And so on, because this is where you're going to find in your research, especially in Facebook groups, there will be continually opposing views, right? Just in the diesel and petrol sort of debate, there are all these continually opposing views, one's better than blah, blah, blah. When you hone down to it, it's just a nuance debate between engines and trade-offs of what you're actually doing. A lot of these opinions are also not really founded, or they're just old tales that have been repeated through time and aren't relevant anymore. A lot of people don't like to update their information, so something that may have been true 10 years ago, which is why everyone says it, isn't true now, but the word of mouth about it continues to persist. Remember as well, there's always going to be exceptions to the rules. So, pick the world's most renowned horrible car, and you can find one of them that still runs and never has any issues, and vice versa. There's always exceptions, but you don't want to find the exceptions, you want to find the norm. Someone might buy the most mistreated Hiace without knowing it and then say, well, I've had nothing but problems with my Hiace. So again, to reiterate, don't get too caught up in this. But when you are doing your research, aim for specificity. One other tip is that keeping a log of previous sales is a good idea and a good way to track the market. So if you sign up for Gumtree and car sales and truck sales, and you sign up for the email alerts, they'll email you the vans, and so that will keep a track record in itself of roughly what the vans are going up for. You can also just screenshot the ones on Facebook Marketplace or in groups and put them into a folder yourself. And then come the time you're ready to buy a van, you have a history of vans that have been advertised and how much for, and you can see a rough direction of where the market is trending. And it also helps you see which ones are selling and which aren't. And if you favorite a van that you think is too pricey, you will see them drop the price until it hits market value. So I ended up deciding basically I'm going to get either a Hiace or an iLoad. So once I had decided that those are the two I'm going to hone down on, I made this spreadsheet and I kept a track of all the vans that were coming up. And if I went and viewed a van in person, I would write that down. I'd write some notes about it and what I thought and if I was considering purchasing it, etc. This does give you an insight into some of the prices back then. My second tip is to stay the heck away from dealers. When I was looking for a van, I viewed this iLoad up for sale for say $30,000. It wasn't clean. It reeked of smoke and yeah, just wasn't in good condition. So I passed on it. The van had been up for a while at this point and eventually I saw that it sold. And after about 1 week of it selling, it was up again, being advertised by a dealer for $40,000. So $10,000 more than what the person was offering it. And who knows what the dealer actually bought it for, probably even less. So yes, they've obviously given it a clean over, put that yucky blackener on everything and, the license plate was cracked. So they put a new license plate holder, just some aesthetic stuff. Probably no more than $1,000 worth, but they put this massive mark on it. And this is especially true for import dealers. Stay away from them. My last tip is to get a good inspection if you're not mechanically inclined. Don't let anyone rush you on a sale. Before I started viewing Hiaces, I actually rented out a Hiace on one of those car renting apps so that I could take it for a long drive to make sure that I liked it, to make sure that that seat was comfortable, because again, I'd heard a lot of people saying it's uncomfortable, and also so that I could take my time inspecting and getting to know the engine so that I was familiar with how to inspect a Hiace engine. And when it came time to view the Hiaces, I was capable enough of at least doing a general inspection before getting it professionally inspected. And it really does help to have a checklist and to actually use it so that you remember to inspect the roof. Unlike me, don't be afraid to bring one. I used to look like the biggest dickhead with like a clipboard and paper and like I was ticking off things and people would look at me weird. I didn't care. Well, I guess I did care because then I migrated that to my phone. And I just had checkboxes. Again, I use Notion. I had checkboxes on like a little Notion thing. You can use any to-do list app. Tick the checkbox, write your little notes about it. Just don't be afraid to take your time, go over the car. If they say you have to view it at night, bring a torch. Develop your own little checklist. And especially once you find a specific car that you like, there will be specific problems with that specific model. So once you've honed it down and you want like a Hiace or an iLoad, write down any specific problems that you need to remember to check, so that you can go over it specifically with those vans. And I'm sure that there are these checklists online that you can find, and I might even do a video on rust because I learn a lot from my first van about rust and the places that rust can get into Hiaces. So don't make this too long. Hopefully this information helps a little bit. I'm sure I've probably missed a lot of stuff. Ask me any questions you want. I'll help you out with whatever I can. And lastly, advice basically to myself and to the very, very few people who may be like me who just overthink the heck out of things. Stop it. You need to take action and commit at some point. It's better that you jump in earlier than later and you become the buy high sell low meme like me, because the sooner you get the van and you get working on it and you get living in it, the sooner you're going to learn. You're going to know what you want. You're going to learn from those mistakes and you're going to be in a way better position than the person who had just been studying online about the perfect van for a year, because you're actually out there learning. So just jump in at some point. Yes, gather some information, but just jump in because something's going to go wrong and that's okay. You'll learn from it.